in this second lecture of Module 3, we're going to talk about applying digital game-based learning to virtual education. In the first lecture, we discussed how you might want to use it in a broad sense, what is game-based learning, and we also talked about the strengths and the challenges behind using gamification or game-based learning strategies. In this lecture, we're going to dive a little more explicitly into types of games, from games that can be used on a computer through to games that can be used on mobile devices, as well as do-it-yourself games. And we're going to talk about how we can implement some of those resources in virtual education. And then we're also going to identify further resources, and many of these are listed on your resource sheet for this week. In fact, the resource sheet for this week I highly encourage you to spend some time with, because there's some great videos with some of the major game developers and people focused on game-based learning strategies in their own research. And then there's some great games and lists of games embedded in that resource list as well for you to explore, possibly using in your virtual classes. So I want to specifically call attention to that resource list this week. But let's jump in. So as we know, our students are often very engaged and motivated by games, as long as they're games that are interesting and effective in making sure that the student's having fun while learning. So how can we think about using games? Well, there's two kinds of games really out there for you to implement in your classes. There's just a traditional game, which is an interactive experience. Players can actually win or lose, and it tends to be more on the edutainment or fun side than the second type of games called serious games. Serious games can also be quite fun, but they're interactive experiences that almost simulate real life. They're not actual simulations, because those oftentimes simulations aren't gamified, but they can simulate real life or simulate activities in a game setting. And those serious games are the ones that are really becoming central to a lot of research being done in education focused on game-based learning, because that's where you can start to see not only the engagement with the material translating into the game, but also the very specific set of skills that you're hoping to, related to the discipline or just related to social or critical thinking skills that you're trying to make sure your students build. So types of games. You've got online games, which are available obviously through any kind of computer, and also through a mobile device, through a browser. But then you also have mobile-specific apps, and there's some really interesting things and unique things you can do with mobile devices that you can't do with computers in the way of implementing game-based strategies. And then finally, you've got do-it-yourself and make-your-own games. So there's the do-it-yourself approach, where you can actually just gamify some of your virtual activities without actually using a particular game itself. And then there's actually make-it-your-own games, where you can have students go build lessons and build games themselves, and the building of the game is the game. And it's also an opportunity to build those skills that you're hoping that they acquire. So let's first talk about online games. This is a really popular game with the youth today, and it's called Minecraft. If you're not familiar with it, it's a very simple interface. It's actually a 16-bit interface, and it allows students to build anything. It can be very open-ended. They can build anything from a city to a lab experiment to all sorts of different things in this very simple game environment and builder environment. But the thing about it is it's being used to develop very specific educational skills, in particular to build out specific lessons in quite a few different disciplines. In fact, one of the links on your resource list identifies 10 different lessons that teachers have created specifically by using Minecraft. So I encourage you to go check out, it's a wiki page actually for lessons in Minecraft, and I encourage you to check that out, because this is a very popular game that kids are playing with on their own and having fun with on their mobile devices as well as on their computers, that you could really use in an educationally viable way in your virtual teaching. Now you also have apps. So that was an example of a computer-based game that you could implement. You could also implement the use of apps. There's quite a few games in for use on mobile devices, both in iOS and Android platforms. You've got things like Brain Pop, and this is where quick quizzes and concepts are taught through a game, and you can level and build points and even get badges through Brain Pop. There's also a great app out there that's focused on learning Shakespeare and actually understanding Shakespeare. And this walks you through the scenes, asks you questions, allows you to revisit summaries, and once again level and play a game as you're working through the understanding of these Shakespeare plays. So you can see you've got science, you've got English, there's all sorts of other great games and apps available out there for mobile devices. And next week, a number of our guest lecturers will be identifying some great discipline-specific games for mobile devices for you all to think about using. On that resource list, there's also a couple of lists of popular mobile apps that you can use depending on your discipline that quite often are free. These two are free, and so a lot of these are free. There are some that are for a low cost, but you could also implement those in supplemental learning or advanced learning opportunities where students might feel comfortable opting into that cost, or you might be able to get a grant or some minor funding to cover that cost. And then you've got the do-it-yourself world. And the do-it-yourself world includes things like GameStar Mechanic. GameStar Mechanic is really popular with kids. You can actually build your own games. But there's a lot of really educational applications to this because you can have students actually build out serious games even that represent their knowledge, their understanding of a particular concept or skill or discipline. And then they're actually asked to express that in the form of a game that another student would play. I recently worked on a research project with biology students, and we had them make the test. And I think you probably have done that before as well, where you ask students to create quiz questions, and then you can use those quiz questions to quiz each other. Well, the interesting thing is we had students build this test, and they built a much more rigorous test when it came time to then compare it to maybe some of the tests that some of the other teachers had built than expected. So there's fun in creating your own game that somebody else might play, or creating your own assessment of someone's skills, which is really what a game can be, that someone else might do. And so students will get into that, but it would also force them to really thoroughly and deeply express their knowledge and understanding of a particular topic. We always say one of the best ways to know how well you know something is to teach it. Well, this is a way also to think about teaching it through a game. Now you also have the Make It Yourself or Make Your Own type of games. And this is where you can actually take just a very simple lesson, not using any of these mobile apps because maybe your students don't have mobile devices. Maybe your students don't even have that great of internet or bandwidth access. So you're not even sure you can get them to use some of the more complex games out there on the internet. So let's say that's your situation and you want to take a lesson and you just want to gamify it. Well, you can do that by first establishing a set of tasks and associating those tasks with either points or stars or something. And those tasks can be things like a scavenger hunt where students have to go identify and collect resources. It could be how they participate in the discussion forums if you're going to have some asynchronous discussion forums. It can be through synchronous settings and students asking and answering questions. It can even be done through a staged project or drafts of a writing assignment or stages of a lab where students work through things, and as they work through things, they can collect points. Now, once you've got students collecting points, in order to gamify it, you probably also want to establish a leaderboard or some sort of way that students can see how are they doing against how they should be doing, or maybe even against other students in the class. Now, there's often a conversation about, do you really want to create a competitive environment? And that's up to you. There are a lot of people that feel comfortable creating a competitive environment where students are challenged and ranking themselves against one another. There are others that don't want to create that kind of setting. So you can choose how you build your leaderboard. Your leaderboard may be just the student against his possible score or where he could go, where he or she just sees, okay, I'm on level 2 and I get to go to level 10. Or the leaderboard can be showing how the student is doing compared to other students. It's really up to your preference and the kind of environment you're building in your virtual class. The other great thing about leaderboards, regardless of whether they are competitive in nature or just individualistic, you can also have badges be awarded. And we actually have in the next lecture a discussion about how to use badges in your classes. But you can actually have them go earn things, badges, prizes, awards, as they're working through stages. And then finally, you can incorporate the leveling of activities and the adaptive learning. Because if students are working through stages, they're earning points, you can actually start to weight points as they're getting higher into their thinking or into more complex tasks. You can have 4 badges turned in for a bigger badge. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can game and play with just a very simple everyday lesson. If you just think through how you want to build that and then how you want to present that to your students. So let's say we want to do a make your own kind scenario and we want to use some just very simple, free, basic technologies that our students could use over the internet. Well, you could use Google Docs to create that leaderboard. It could be where students go and report, perhaps in a Google Excel spreadsheet as a Google Doc. They report their status. It could be where you're having students see each other's status or just how you're reporting back to students their status. You can have students use and receive pictures, simple pictures of things as a badge or an award. Oh, you got to level 3 or you did these 4 tasks. Here you get this really cool picture. And students can post those pictures on their profile in their course. They could collect them. They could have them on their phone if they do have a mobile device. Or they could even just, if they had access to a simple printer, print them up and post them on their wall. It's a way, though, to reward somebody with a very simple acknowledgement, a picture or a very basic badge as they're working through activities. And then the multiple steps. By breaking down an activity into multiple steps and stages, and ideally from easier to hard, you're able to create levels. If you're going to have students work through a series of problems, chunk your problems into easy, medium, hard, and think about how they progress through those and how they earn points as they progress through those in order to build these levels, which is also very popular in a gaming scenario. And then finally, not only are you building levels, but you want students to level themselves, or you want to have leveling activities, and those can just be incremental assessments. They could be things that you evaluate. They could be quick quizzes. They could be quick interactions in an asynchronous or synchronous fashion that students have with one another. So those are just some very simple things that you can do with easy, simple technologies to even make your own gamified lesson. Or you can try some of those games that are suggested in the list. Or you can even use mobile apps if your students have those mobile devices to be successful in implementing game-based strategies in your class. Now, as you're thinking about this, I've got a question for you to reflect on. I now teach high school algebra, and my students are ages 14 to 18, just for those of you not in the United States. Now, I only have access to the internet and a computer to do work in my virtual class. There's no mobile devices, no fun other kinds of applications or things that students can use, no 3D printer, nothing like that. All I have is basic internet and a computer for my students to do work in their class. And it's a virtual class, 100% virtual. So I want to use some game-based learning strategies in order to motivate my students a little bit more. I'm finding that because it's an entirely virtual class, my students aren't as engaged and they kind of tend to do the bare minimum. So what are the kinds of things that I could go use that I could implement these game-based strategies with little or no cost? So I encourage you not only to think about the make your own approach, but also to take a look at that list and see if you can find any great algebra-related games out there that are free, that are computer-based and internet-based, that students could use in order to become more motivated and hopefully more engaged and be able to build their skills, their math skills that I want them to build more effectively.